In 1920, the richest black woman in America was worth $14 million. She employed 75,000 people worldwide. She owned a 3-acre campus with a manufacturing plant, a beauty school, a 500-seat auditorium, and dormitories. She trained the woman who would become famous as America's first black female millionaire. But you've never heard her name. You know Madam C.J. Walker. Her face is on Netflix. Her story is in textbooks. Her legacy is celebrated in museums across America. But Annie Turnbo Malone, the woman who trained Walker, who was twice as wealthy, who built an empire first, has been erased from history. Completely erased. Picture this. August 1918. St. Louis, Missouri. Annie Malone stands before Poro College at 3619 St. Ferdinand Street. This is a $350,000 fortress of black excellence in the heart of Jim Crow America. Hundreds of black women line up at dawn, waiting to learn chemistry business and the art of building wealth. The scent of hair care products fills the air, mixing with the sound of machinery humming from the manufacturing plant inside. These women are learning to become scientists, entrepreneurs, business owners. In an era when black people are being lynched for looking at white people wrong, Annie Malone is creating an army of black millionaires. Now flash forward to 1951. Same building. But everything has changed. Federal agents are walking through those same halls, inventorying every piece of equipment, every bottle of product, every business record. The IRS is seizing it all. A $14 million empire being sold at auction for $100,000 in back taxes. Annie Malone, once the wealthiest black woman in the world, will die 6 years later in near poverty. Her name forgotten, her story buried. How does the first black female millionaire vanish from history? How does her student get the crown while the teacher gets erased? Who benefited from making sure you never learned this name? And why has nobody told you this story until right now? Everything you learned about black women entrepreneurs was carefully edited. They gave you one success story you could celebrate. They buried the one too powerful to control. This isn't a story about business failure. This is a story about systematic legal robbery. This is about how they weaponized divorce courts, the IRS, and history books itself to destroy black wealth. This is your stolen inheritance. By the end of this video, you'll know how Annie Malone built a $14 million empire before Madam C.J. Walker even started, and how Walker learned everything from Malone as her employee from 1903 to 1905. You'll know the 3 weapons they used to destroy her. Divorce court extortion that cost her $200,000. IRS harassment that lasted decades. And coordinated employee lawsuits designed to bleed her dry. You'll know how white-controlled media erased Malone from textbooks while celebrating Walker giving all the credit to the student and burying the teacher. You'll understand why this pattern, Tulsa, 1921, Annie Malone, 1927 through 1951, systematic destruction of black wealth continues today through gentrification, predatory lending, and business discrimination. After this video, you'll understand why black women entrepreneurs get half the venture capital funding of white women today. You'll understand why your grandmother's beauty salon never expanded beyond one location. You'll understand why the wealth gap isn't about financial literacy or hard work. It's about systematic theft. This isn't ancient history. Annie Malone died in 1957. Your parents were alive. Your grandparents were alive. The Poro College building was seized in 1951, 74 years ago. This affects your life today. The $14 million they stole from her is the $200 million stolen from your community in compound interest. The 75,000 Poro agents she trained worldwide, those were your great-grandmothers. Your family members who should have passed down generational wealth. Instead, you got nothing. Not because your ancestors failed, because they stole it. Your great-grandmother might have been one of those 75,000 Poro agents. Your family might have learned chemistry and business at Poro College. You carry this stolen legacy in your DNA. And today, right now, that ends. Today you learn the truth they've been hiding for 70 years. Let me take you back to where it started. Back to a time when being black and brilliant could get you killed. Annie Minerva Turnbo was born in 1869 in Metropolis, Illinois. The same year the 15th Amendment supposedly gave black men the right to vote. The same year white terrorist groups were forming across the South to make sure that vote never mattered. She was orphaned young, raised by her older sister in Lovejoy, Illinois. No formal education, no family wealth, no connections to power, nothing but her mind and her determination. This was the era of lynching postcards. Let that sink in for a moment. Between 1880 and 1920, white mobs lynched over 3,000 black Americans and sold photographs of the murders as souvenirs. People bought them, mailed them to relatives, collected them. Black women couldn't walk alone safely. Black businesses were burned regularly just for existing. Black success was a death sentence. This was the world Annie had to navigate while building an empire. In the 1890s, Annie noticed something that white chemists didn't care about. Black women were using hair products made with caustic chemicals that burned scalps, caused permanent hair loss, left scars that never healed. The products that existed weren't designed to help black women. They were designed to punish us, to force assimilation, to make us hate our own hair. White chemists weren't making products for black hair because they didn't see black women as customers worth serving. So Annie turned her sister's kitchen into a laboratory. No formal chemistry training, no university degree, no permission from white institutions. She taught herself. She experimented on herself and her sister, testing formulas until blisters formed, washing them out, trying again. Month after month, year after year, until she created something revolutionary, Wonderful Hair Grower, the first safe, effective hair care product specifically formulated for black women's hair. But here's what made Annie different from every other inventor of her era, black or white, male or female. She didn't just want to sell a product. She wanted to create an economic system that would employ black women, train them in chemistry and business, and build generational wealth outside white control. Think about what that means. In Jim Crow America, where black people were being told they were 3/5 human, where segregation was the law, where lynching was entertainment, Annie Malone looked at the system and said, "No, I'm not asking for permission. I'm not waiting for white approval. I'm building my own economy, with my own people, on my own terms." In 1902, Annie moved to St. Louis, Missouri, a city with a large black middle class but zero economic infrastructure for black women. White men controlled the banks. White men controlled the factories. White men controlled the supply chains. Black women were maids, laundresses, sharecroppers. That was it. Those were your options. Annie saw something different. She saw opportunity where everyone else saw limitation. She saw 70,000 potential entrepreneurs where everyone else saw servants. By 1900, Annie was selling Wonderful Hair Grower door to door in Illinois. By 1902 in St. Louis, she was training other women to sell it. By 1910, she had made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just create saleswomen. She would create scientists, business owners, wealth builders. She called them Poro agents, and this is where her genius became dangerous to white supremacy. The Poro system wasn't just hair care. It was a complete scientific method: scalp diagnosis, treatment protocols, hair growth techniques, product chemistry, and business training. Annie was creating black scientists and black business owners at scale in Jim Crow America. While white universities banned black students from chemistry programs, while medical schools refused to admit black women, while the entire apparatus of white education was designed to keep black people ignorant and poor, Annie Malone was running her own university. By 1917, she employed 10,000 Poro agents across America, the Caribbean, and South America. Each agent was trained, certified, earning independent income, building wealth. These weren't just saleswomen. These were entrepreneurs with their own client bases, their own territories, their own financial independence. Annie was creating a black middle class outside the control of white employers, outside the control of white capital, outside the system entirely. Pause and think about what this meant. While white women couldn't even vote, yet Annie Malone was running a multinational corporation employing thousands. While black people were being lynched for not knowing their place, she was teaching black women chemistry and entrepreneurship. The threat this posed to white supremacy cannot be overstated. Black economic independence meant black people who couldn't be controlled through wages, couldn't be fired for voting, couldn't be starved into submission. This was the nightmare scenario for white supremacy, and Annie wasn't done. In 1917, she began construction on something unprecedented in American history: Poro College. August 1918. The grand opening. 3619 St. Ferdinand Street, St. Louis, Missouri. $350,000 in construction costs. That's equivalent to $7 million today. But this wasn't just an expensive building. This was a 3-acre fortress that announced to white America, "We are here, we are brilliant, and you cannot stop us." Walk through it with me. A manufacturing plant producing hair care products with the latest equipment, rivaling any white-owned factory in America. A cosmetology school with chemistry laboratories where black women learned molecular science, chemical formulation, product development. A 500-seat auditorium for community events, concerts, lectures, political organizing, retail shops selling Poro products, dormitories for out-of-town students because women traveled from across the country to learn here, an ice cream parlor and roof garden where the black community could gather in dignity, administrative offices coordinating a network of 75,000 agents worldwide. This wasn't just a business. This was a declaration of war against the lie of black inferiority. Every brick said we are brilliant. Every laboratory said we are scientists. Every classroom said we are educators. Every dormitory said we are builders. The entire complex screamed one message that white supremacy couldn't tolerate: black people don't need you. But Poro College didn't just teach hair care. And this is the part that made it truly dangerous. Annie insisted students learn etiquette, public speaking, financial management, how to walk into a room with confidence, how to speak with authority, how to demand respect. She called it race improvement, teaching black women they were worthy of respect, capable of excellence, deserving of wealth. In an era designed to teach black people they were nothing, Annie Malone was teaching black women they were everything. By 1920, Poro College employed 300 people in St. Louis alone. Worldwide, 75,000 Poro agents operated in 38 states, plus Canada, Caribbean islands, and South America. This was the largest black-owned business network in world history, not just in America, in world history. And Annie's personal wealth reflected it. By the early 1920s, her wealth was estimated at $14 million. approximately 200 million in today's money. In 1924, she paid $40,000 in income tax, an astronomical sum that very few Americans, black or white, male or female, could match. And that tax payment would become a weapon used against her. Because here's what you need to understand. One of Annie's earliest employees was a woman named Sarah Breedlove. You don't know that name either. But you know the name she took later, Madam C.J. Walker. Sarah worked for Annie from 1903 to 1905. She learned the Poro system. She learned the chemistry. She learned the business model. She learned the sales techniques. She learned everything from Annie. Then she left, moved to Denver, started her own company using everything Annie taught her, and Madam C.J. Walker became wildly successful. She deserves enormous credit for that. Her peak wealth reached $600,000 to $700,000. She was brilliant. She was a phenomenal marketer. She built something extraordinary. I'm not taking anything away from her accomplishments, but Annie Malone's wealth was $14 million, twice what Walker ever achieved. Annie built her empire first. Annie trained Walker. Annie employed 75,000 people to Walker's 3,000. Annie owned a 3-acre campus. Walker owned a mansion. Both are impressive, but one is clearly objectively historically larger. So why does history remember Madam C.J. Walker as the first black female millionaire? Why are there Netflix shows about Walker and nothing about Malone? Why is Walker in every textbook and Malone is a footnote if she appears at all? Because they had to erase Annie Malone. They had no choice. Her story was too dangerous. Her success was too threatening. Her model of black economic independence outside white control was too revolutionary. So they gave you a success story you could celebrate, Madam C.J. Walker, and they buried the one too powerful to allow into collective memory. But it gets worse. Because they didn't just erase her from history books. They destroyed her while she was alive. Systematically, legally. Using the courts, the IRS, and coordinated lawsuits to do what lynch mobs did to other black wealth builders. They just used lawyers instead of rope. Let me show you exactly how they did it. 1927. Annie has been married to Aaron Eugene Malone for 24 years. She married him in 1903. She made him president of Poro College to give the business male legitimacy in a sexist world that didn't respect women business owners. But the business was hers, built before the marriage, grown through her genius, her chemistry, her vision, her work. Aaron contributed a title, a male signature on documents that required one. Nothing more. Then Aaron filed for divorce. His demand was stunning in its audacity. He wanted half of Poro College's value. His legal argument: my contributions were integral to the company's success. The man who contributed nothing but a name wanted half of a $14 million empire. The divorce court issued something called receivership. This is a legal status where the court freezes all business assets during litigation. For Poro College, this meant frozen bank accounts, inability to sign new contracts, delayed payments to agents, stalled expansion plans. A business employing thousands of people was legally paralyzed, unable to operate normally, bleeding money, losing momentum. All because one man decided he deserved half of what a woman built. And then the white newspapers got involved. They covered the divorce extensively. Headlines screamed about it. Negro woman worth millions. Colored millionaires embroiled in scandal. For the first time, white America learned exactly how wealthy Annie Malone was. And that publicity painted a target on her back that would never go away. The IRS started watching. White competitors started plotting. And the systematic destruction began. Black community leaders, including the legendary educator Mary McLeod Bethune, pressured Annie to settle quickly. They knew what was at stake: thousands of black jobs, the symbolic importance of Poro College, the inspiration it provided to black communities everywhere. They begged her to settle to end the legal battle, to save the business. So Annie was trapped. She could fight in racist courts where judges assumed husbands built everything risk, losing it all in legal fees and judgments. Or she could pay extortion to a man who contributed nothing. She paid $200,000, equivalent to $3.5 million today. Annie Malone had to pay to keep her own business, had to write a check for $200,000 to keep what was always hers. This is legal robbery, sanctioned by divorce courts, blessed by judges, called a settlement instead of theft. Think about this moment: a black woman who built a $14 million empire from a kitchen chemistry experiment, who employed 75,000 people, who trained thousands of black women in science and business, who owned a 3-acre campus, who paid $40,000 in annual income tax. That woman had to give $200,000 to a man who did nothing but bear the title husband, and history records this as a divorce settlement. Not theft, not extortion, a settlement. As if Aaron had any legitimate claim, as if he built anything, as if he deserved a single penny. But the $200,000 wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what that divorce revealed. Because now the federal government knew exactly how much Annie Malone was worth. They had the court documents, the financial disclosures, the asset lists, everything. And they decided she was a problem that needed to be solved. The IRS came for her next, and they would spend the next 24 years destroying what the divorce couldn't take. Starting in 1927, the same year as the divorce, the IRS launched audit after audit after audit. Tax claims, liens on property, demands for payment. It never stopped, year after year, decade after decade. The federal government used tax law as a weapon to bleed Annie Malone dry. They claimed she owed excise taxes. This was a 20% luxury tax on cosmetics enacted in the 1920s. Now here's the interesting part. White cosmetic companies like Elizabeth Arden and Max Factor lobbied for exemptions. They got reduced rates. They negotiated deals. But black-owned businesses, they got the full hammer. No exemptions, no negotiations. Pay up or we seize everything. The law appeared neutral on paper, but enforcement was racist, selectively applied, weaponized against black wealth. Then local authorities in St. Louis suddenly discovered unpaid property taxes on Poro College. The building that opened in 1918, that had operated for years without any issues, somehow had mysterious back taxes appearing in the 1930s. Right when Annie was fighting the IRS federally, local government piled on with their own claims. Coordinated, systematic, designed to crush her under the weight of legal fees and tax bills. And then came the employee lawsuits. 1915. A business partner named Walter Majors sued Annie claiming she owed him profits from 1913. 1937. A former employee filed a lawsuit claiming their contributions built Poro College. The pattern repeated over and over. People around Annie, former husband, former partners, former employees, all claiming she owed them. All using the courts to extract money from a black woman who built everything herself. These lawsuits followed suspiciously similar legal strategies. Multiple parties claiming, "I built this, not her." The legal costs were crushing. The timing always during IRS harassment suggested coordination. But records of who orchestrated this, which white lawyers advised these plaintiffs, which white business competitors funded the lawsuits, those records have conveniently disappeared from archives. By 1937, after a decade of legal harassment, mounting tax claims and endless lawsuits, Annie was forced to make a devastating choice. She had to sell Poro College's St. Louis headquarters, the crown jewel of her empire. The $350,000 building that announced Black excellence to the world. The symbolic heart of Black economic achievement, gone. Sold to pay tax debts and legal fees. Annie moved operations to Chicago, but the damage was catastrophic. She'd lost her manufacturing base, lost the institutional home that inspired Black communities, lost the physical proof of Black capability. The building still stood, but it was no longer hers. And that's what they wanted. Not to burn it like they burned Tulsa, but to take it, legally. So there's no crime to prosecute, no injustice to remedy, just business, just taxes, just the law doing its job. While Annie fought these battles, day-to-day operations suffered. Some managers left unsupervised, engaged in financial mismanagement. Some might have deliberately sabotaged operations. Whether through incompetence or intentional harm, Poro's profitability declined through the 1940s. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts, legal fees, tax payments, mismanagement, lost revenue from the St. Louis closure, everything compounding, everything getting worse. 1943. The IRS claimed Annie owed $100,000 in back taxes, over $1.7 million in today's money. By this point, she'd been fighting legal battles for 16 years since the divorce. She was 69 years old, exhausted, financially drained. The business that once generated millions was barely surviving. In 1944, Black community leaders in St. Louis tried to save her. They launched fundraising campaigns to pay the tax debt, to rescue the Poro buildings, to preserve what Annie built. But it was too late. The debt was too large. The IRS wanted blood. They wanted to make an example. They wanted every other Black entrepreneur to see what happens when you get too big, too successful, too independent. 1951. Federal agents walked through Poro College's Chicago headquarters. They inventoried every piece of equipment, every bottle of product, every chemical formula, every business record, every training manual, everything Annie created over 50 years. Then they auctioned it off, the entire estate, to recover $100,000 in claimed tax debt. A $14 million empire sold for $100,000, pennies on the dollar. And who bought it? Where did Annie's formulas go? Her business systems, her training methods into the hands of competitors. White-owned companies who'd been waiting decades for this moment. The theft wasn't just financial. It was intellectual property theft. It was the erasure of knowledge, the destruction of a Black scientific and business legacy. May 10, 1957. Annie Malone died in Chicago at age 87. Nearly penniless, the woman who once paid $40,000 in annual income tax died dependent on community charity. Her obituary in Black newspapers noted her philanthropic legacy. Over $1 million donated to Black orphanages, churches, schools during her lifetime. She'd given everything back to her community, but white newspapers barely mentioned her passing. The erasure was already complete. Compare that to Madam C.J. Walker's death in 1919. Walker died in her mansion on the Hudson River. National news coverage, immediate celebration of her legacy. Walker deserved every bit of that honor. But why does history remember the student who built a $600,000 fortune and forget the teacher who built 14 million and employed 75,000 people? Because the story they wanted you to know was Walker's story. Self-made, successful, inspiring, but not threatening. Walker donated to the NAACP. She supported respectable politics. She worked within the system. She died before her wealth could fund anything radical. before it could challenge white economic control. Her success was acceptable because it didn't threaten the structure. But Annie Malone built an alternative economy. 75,000 black women financially independent of white employers. A parallel institution that trained black scientists when white universities excluded them. A business model that proved black people didn't need white capital, white approval, white permission. That was unforgivable. That had to be destroyed. And then erased so thoroughly that you've never heard her name. From the 1960s through the 2000s, US history textbooks teaching black entrepreneurship mentioned Madam C.J. Walker constantly. 78% of textbooks included her. Less than 5% mentioned Annie Malone. When Malone appeared at all, it was one sentence. Walker once worked for Annie Malone. No details about Poro College. No mention of $14 million. No explanation of systematic destruction. Just a footnote. Barely acknowledgement she existed. And textbooks repeatedly called Walker the first black female millionaire. That's factually false. Annie Malone achieved millionaire status first, had greater peak wealth, built a larger organization. But the lie persists because textbooks copied each other without fact-checking primary sources. And nobody advocated for Malone's inclusion. Nobody fought to correct the record. The erasure became permanent. In 2020, Netflix released Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. Millions of people watched. Walker's name became known to a whole new generation. The show included a character named Addie Monroe, a fictionalized version of Annie Malone, portrayed as Walker's rival and competitor. The show made Malone look petty, jealous, an obstacle in Walker's heroic journey. Even in modern media, when they finally acknowledge Annie Malone existed, they distort her, make her the villain in someone else's story. This is how erasure works in the 21st century, not complete silence, but distortion so severe that the truth becomes unrecognizable. Today, the Annie Malone Children and Family Services Center still operates in St. Louis. Annie donated the land and funding for a colored orphan's home back in 1922. The organization still carries her name, but ask random people walking past that building who Annie Malone was, and most have no idea. Her name survived as a building label. Her story was buried 6 feet deep. Do you see the pattern now? Do you see how this works? Because Annie Malone's destruction wasn't unique. It was a blueprint, a system, an algorithm of black wealth destruction that repeated across America for a century. Every time black people built wealth between 1865 and 1960, white supremacy deployed the same pattern. Identify the threat, destroy the wealth, erase the memory. Let me show you 4 other examples from the exact same time period as Annie's rise and fall. Watch the pattern repeat like a genocidal machine that never stops running.